Want to give a quick shout out to all of my patrons. Thank you so much for all of the continued support. And I am done, thank God. So I just got done reading The Coming of Conan the Cimmerian. This is the first short story collection, the first 13 short stories in Conan the Barbarian by Robert E. Howard. And I want to give you my unedited thoughts on finishing this book, which was just right now. So God, I hated this book. This is so bad. I am in shock at how horrific, truly horrific this book was. It's just, I'm so glad I'm done. And I got to be straight up with you. I did not finish this book. I just got done with, I think like the 8th or 9th short story out of 13. And I can't keep going. I can't keep going, everybody. I tried. I did my best. I feel really bad. Tim SP, I'm sorry, my man. Tim SP won the TBR contest twice, and when you win twice, you get to pick a book for me to read and review. And I said that I'd finish any book on that list. Anytime I have to read a book, I'll do it, but I can't do it. I already got what I got out of this thing. I know what I'm getting, because all these stories are really, really similar, and there's no way that they're going to get any better. So, sorry, Tim. I did my best. So, my initial impressions here. When I think of Conan the Barbarian, I was born in the 80s, and, Conan the Barbarian, the movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, came out before I was born by a little bit. But I definitely saw it when I was younger, or at least parts of it. And I remember thinking, like, this is the corniest piece of junk that I've seen. And knowing that it came from source material, I have been wondering for a long time, like, are the movies just janky? Are they totally, abdicating the source material? And what's happening there? But no, the movie's pretty much spot on. I mean, I'd have to watch the movie again. Maybe it just totally takes a different plot and runs with it. But the feel of the movie and this corniness and basic bones plot is what we got here in these books. So I would say the movies did it very faithfully done. They shouldn't have. They should have done it in a totally different direction. But yeah, so ultimately, though, I'm not going to look at this book with the hatred that I have for some other books that I've read that are horrific, because this book came out, I mean, the omnibus got put together, I think, in like the early 2000s, the one I'm reading right now. But it's combining a bunch of stories that were written a very long time ago. So the first story in this collection came out in 1932. Came out in this little pulp magazine. And the last one in this collection came out in 1967. But most of these were written in the 1930s. There were some in the 1940s, some big jumps there. But just for reference on how old this is, The Lord of the Rings, which is a series I think that most people kind of consider as the dawn of modern fantasy, came out in 1954, 22 years after this story first came out in a pulp magazine. So I do have to give some major, like, what am I looking for here? Like kid gloves here on this book, because I get how old this was, that there's no way that it's just still going to be good. And, I have some kind of wild takes on Lord of the Rings. I don't love it as much as most of you love it. I like it. I don't love it. And my criticisms with it are the criticisms I have with this to 1% of the feeling. Because this series and these stories are so bad. I mean, they're truly atrocious. But I get it. I'm glad that I read this, I think, because, I feel like it's important, at least for me, maybe not for you. Don't read this. You don't need this. But as a fantasy reviewer, it's nice to figure out where the genre kind of started out. And clearly this genre started out a long, long time before this, with things like Beowulf and campfire stories before that. But in the written format, coming out in publications, this is among the earlier fantasy stories that I've gotten out there, certainly that have any sort of, following. And I also get that these stories were not written as like a book. They were written as little short stories submitted to a magazine for a very niche audience. But I really do feel like the only reason that anyone should ever read these stories is for historical perspective. The flaws are so deep here that I struggle to see what anybody could possibly enjoy out of these in 2024 besides this. So let's dig into some of the problems that I had here. Let's start with the world building, or lack thereof, because the world is Europe and Northern Africa, like squished together with no sea in between them. And I've read that that's actually how he made this map, is he just put them together. He put these kind of geometric shapes to put these different countries here, and that's what he got. But instead of using that as the basis for his map, which, to be fair, George R.R. Martin kind of did with his map of Westeros, which, looks a lot like the United Kingdom. Some differences, but, you got your icy north up top. You've got a kind of similar shape. But what George R.R. Martin did was he said, let's make this map, and then we'll make new cultures inside of it. But what Robert E. Howard did was he made this map, and he kept the same countries basically with different names on them, with just wildly racist caricatures of real areas. I mean, you've got your hook-nosed Shemites, or whatever he calls them, which, we know what that is here. It's super racist and uncomfortable to read. You've got your northern white armies of the good people. You've got your evil non-white southern foes that are that can only win with sorcery and, sorcerers and magicians. And the racism here is so in your face, and it's so uncomfortable. Now, again, I get it. It was the 1930s. Things were super racist. And I'm not saying this to say Robert E. Howard is this really bad guy. I don't know anything about Robert E. Howard. Maybe he was. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe he was just, this is a guy of the times writing for what people liked to read back then. I truly have no idea. But what I can say is this is a really tough pill to swallow in 2024. It's really uncomfortable, and it's constant. I mean, the bad guys are all black. The good guys are all white. And there's these really racist things above and beyond that just are cringe-inducing, to say the least. And, if it was just the racism thing, I'd have a problem with it. But it's the sexism thing, too, which obviously we got this racist component. Clearly, we're going to have this sexist component, too. It's the 1930s. Things were really sexist. But that doesn't make them fun to read anymore. The general sexism and creepiness of this main character, Conan, is so off-putting and makes me end up hating his character. All of the women want to have sex with Conan. And multiple times here, he attempts to commit sexual violence against the women here. But it's not in this, he's doing a wrong thing here. It's portrayed in the sense of well, obviously he would want to rape this woman. She's just asking for it, She's sitting there looking all attractive and trying to run away from him. What else would he do? It's so bad. I mean, the first story alone, he chases this ice lady for no particular reason. And the only reason that he doesn't rape her is because she's saved at the last second by somebody else that he ends up killing. I normally don't have as much of a problem with this in modern day books, because almost every other time, at least in the stories that I've read, it serves some narrative purpose. Whether it's to make me loathe a particular character, have some redemption arc that this woman's going to go through, or something else entirely. It exists, and there's a purpose for it. But here, it just feels like it exists just for the sake of existing. It's so heavy-handed for no reason, and it's so cringe-inducing, and it makes me hate Conan and hate the book. The author also just straight up obsesses over Conan's physical appearance and everyone else's physical appearance, really. But we never really understand the characters themselves. I mean, physical stereotypes here substitute characterization in literally every single story. And honestly, the largest failure here is Conan himself. I mean, we don't ever end up really knowing anything about Conan's motivations and goals other than above where we began. I get the reasoning here. Like, it's an episodic nature. He's writing these really short stories. And the magazines they're published in, you know, it just ends up making this weird reading in a collection when Conan starts every story as a blank slate, coming from the wild. And, you know, I think, like, one of the appeals of reading these older pulp stories is that, like, they tend to be free of that, like, moralistic good and evil baggage of epic fantasy that you often see. But that's missing here. It's like everything Conan does is presented as unambiguously good, even though he's doing things that clearly are unambiguously bad. And he's fighting this unambiguously evil that's always like this dark-skinned enemy. It sucks. You know, the plotting is particularly egregiously horrible. Like, each of these little stories seem to be written to make Conan seem awesome. And no other reason than that. Like, the other characters practically don't exist other than to, you know, show and contrast with how amazing Conan is. Like, look, I get why these stories had an appeal in an era when they were originally written. I get it. But we no longer live in that era. And these stories should be treated for what they are today. Like a glimpse into some things of the origins of the fantasy genre, but nothing more. You know, the amount of info dumping here would make Lord of the Rings seem light. In the first story alone, like, and I'm not just picking on this because it's the first story. It's just coming to my mind because it's the first thing and it shocked me so much. But we got like 5 pages of like wall of text explaining all these different people, who they are, where they're from, what they look like, for no reason, because they all just end up dying. And pretty quickly. It's a short little story. And this is constant. You just get these descriptions and just the most info dumps that anyone is ever going to write. And it's hard to read. I mean, you're reading this being like, should I be memorizing this? Should I remember? Do I highlight this section so I can go back? And the answer is always no. So you just end up saying, like, I should just ignore all this stuff. But you ignore it, and then what are you left with? You're left with nothing. You're left with these random characters that are just talking about how awesome Conan is. And then Conan just comes in and just starts doing, like, sword smash, and just, let me kill everybody, and woo! And there's nothing. I mean, all of the info you get on these interesting stories are happening off screen. And then what you get on screen is just boring, attack scenes that are nothing. Oh, now Conan's going to fight 6 guys. I wonder how that's going to go. Yep, he's going to kill them all. Woo, go Conan. You're so awesome. And man, your sinewy muscles are just ripped. And look how your gleaming sweat just comes off your golden body. And the women are just looking the same. And all of them want Conan. And like, Jesus, give me a break, Robert E. Howard. Like, God, this is hard to stomach. So I'm done. I've done it. I read it. I'll never do it again. And I would never in a million years recommend this story to anybody unless you're like a fantasy historian and you're like, I gotta read them all. I gotta learn the backstory to this genre for some weird reason. But like, you should read books to have fun, right? I think so. There's no fun to be had here. So if that's why you read books, don't read this. If you're reading for some other reason, I guess maybe. Or just like go read the Wikipedia page on them. And, the Wikipedia entry for each story would probably be like a fourth of the story length because the stories are so short. This sucks. I'm glad it's done. Glad I read it. Glad I'm done with it. I'm glad I never have to think about it again. So that is it for me. Thank you so much for watching, and as always, happy reading to you. Thanks again to all my patrons, with a special shout out to my Ascendant tier and Librarian tier patrons: Anna G, CJ, Doust, Darren, Gregory, Jonathan, Nathan T, Nev's Book Channel, 𝐿, Ron Reich, Russell, Ryan L, Sydney Baker, Tay C, Tahir, Anna, Andra, Blair, Brock, Evan, Fanixan, Harry B, Joe, Cat Mick, Michael Sugarman, Philippe, Sky, TW57, 𝗏𝐿𝐴𝐾𝐼, and Zion. Thanks for sticking to the end of this video, and if you want to watch some more content from my channel, click over here and I've got some good videos for you. Thanks so much.